Seems like I'm back in the seat because we are live from Fastport Studios. It's Road Gang Radio with your host, the one-of-a-kind, truck-loving, my friend, your friend, Jimmy Mack.
Friends, this is a long-time friend of the show. Robert Braswell is the Executive Director of the ATA's Technology and Maintenance Council. He joins us this morning, as he always does, for the longest-running segment on all of Radio Nemo's platforms. And I'm going back, unless you want to count Dave playing music, there is no segment that has run longer than Tech Talk with TMC. Robert, good morning. How are you doing, my friend?
TMC.
Do I have a Robert in the house?
Yeah, you do. Can you not hear me?
I don't hear a Robert in the house. I know you hear a Robert in the house, Phone Master Dre, but I don't. There he is.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad you can hear me, Jimmy Mack.
Good morning to you.
Good morning to you as well. Great to be here for the segment. And, today it's a really neat topic because I think our listeners are going to really appreciate this one. Everybody struggles with this particular issue, the issue of keep, trade, or sell a truck. That's the magic thing. It's what are the key things you have to deal with in terms of managing your profitability in your operation. And joining us on the program today is our technical director at TMC, Jack Legler. And we have a new recommended practice on this very subject. He's going to be talking about it and what it has to say for our listening audience. But before we get started, we always like to let our listeners know there's a special offer. And this week, with the topic being the keep, sell, and trade, we figure the PMI manual for technicians is great because if you don't keep your rig in great shape, you're going to have a lesser return on investment when it comes to resale. So that is available for the discounted price of just $25 plus shipping and handling. You can get it by calling our customer service line toll free at 1-866 821-3468. Just mention Radio Nemo, and you can get it today for that special price. Also, if you're an owner-operator or you're a small fleet, as we always say, if you have 100 or fewer power units, we would love to have you as a member of TMC, and you can join for the discounted annual dues of just $150. That's quite a bit of a discount off of the ordinary $450 membership price. And do that today. You'll get our 2-volume recommended practice, including the RP that we're talking about on the show today, plus about 4,000 pages more of great information covering the truck from bumper to bumper. So please call that same toll-free number if you're interested in signing up. And as we always remind our listeners at the top of the program, any recommended practices we discuss on the program reflect the consensus of our members. We offer them as recommendations only, and everyone is first determined for themselves if they are safe and appropriate for their operation. Please remember that TMC doesn't endorse any product, person, or service, and the opinions expressed on the show are those of the individual and not necessarily the opinion of his or her company, nor TMC, unless stated otherwise. And with all of that out of the way, please welcome to the program this morning, Jack Legler. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning, Robert. It's good to be here as always.
So keep, trade, or sell. Boy, that's the age-old question that often keeps, equipment owners and fleet managers up at night when it comes to vehicle acquisition. The decision on how long to hold on to a major rolling asset like a tractor trailer or a commercial vehicle, it's a perplexing technical challenge, isn't it? And it's an economic exercise in capital management, whether you look at it that way or not. And with this rapid evolution of all these multiple technologies out there affecting the safety, environmental performance, operational efficiency of the new commercial vehicles, boy, there's sure a lot of opportunities out there to both upgrade and replace or rebuild fleet equipment. And the Technology and Maintenance Council, with all of this complexity in mind, has developed a brand new recommended practice on the topic, haven't we?
Yes, we have TMC RP 1620, which is basically when to sell, trade, or keep a major rolling asset. And I think you hit it right on the head, Robert. It's because of all of the changes going on in the industry, both technologically, new technologies are available, also regulatory mandates, the electrification movement, whether it's voluntary or at the end of a regulatory requirement, that kind of upsets the entire thought process on total cost of ownership. Because basically, essentially you buy a vehicle, you use it, and hopefully at the end you recover money at the end of that process that you can then apply to the acquisition of new equipment, whether it's the same equipment, but now especially it may be a totally different manufacturing line. It may be a totally different technology, such as an EV, Class 8 EV now, that may totally change the calculus. So you have to understand your numbers, bottom line.
So I mentioned at the beginning of the program that there's a connection between the decision to keep, sell, or trade a truck and preventive maintenance. And that's why we have the special offer today, PMI Manual for Technicians. There are a number of factors that you really have to keep in mind when you're running your present vehicle in order to prepare for this important decision. And one of the ones is, if you're looking for the total cost of ownership, you're looking for what impact this new purchase or trade will have on your operational costs for PM, you've got to figure some of these important what we call KPIs or parameters. And the first of them is ease of repair, right? That's a big factor when you're taking a look at keep, sell, or trade a truck.
That's right. Yeah, TMC publishes, of course, standard repair time surveys very regularly. And one of the things, understanding where your numbers, where your repair times in your fleet match up against those benchmarks, because that's going to affect the ability of to sell it in the secondary market, or actually may, if indeed the vehicle can easily be kept on the road without a lot of additional expense, it may well be to your benefit to keep that, because the cost of ongoing maintenance is favorable to you. But the idea of knowing when that balancing point tips over to the sell side.
Now, another interesting item or KPI or parameter that we look at is extended fluid change intervals. New synthetic fluids are out there that enable the equipment to withstand higher temperatures. They're better lubricated. And you can take advantage of this with some of the newer lubricants and the newer designs than you can with the older ones, can't you?
That's right. It reduces the wear and tear. And if you think about that depreciation curve being flattened out somewhat because of the advantages of decreases in the change intervals that are required, or increases in the mileage, or decreases in the amount of interval maintenance you have to do because of the quality of lubricants.
Sometimes it doesn't always seem like it, but another factor is improved engineering and design on the newer models. Most of the times, newer models are better than the older models. Sometimes you really wonder about that. But by and large, you do get a benefit from newer engineering and design. What are some of the things to think about, for example, in terms of a current rig versus a potential new rig?
Well, again, obviously, one of the big advantages on performance is air disc brakes that have come into the industry fairly widespread over the last few years. But of course, now if you're selling to a secondary buyer, does that buyer understand the advantages of ADB, and is that attractive to them? And also, again, it affects your total TCO, because if you're still trying to maintain traditional SKM drum brakes in a mixed fleet, you've got an increased complexity as to whether to keep that vehicle or to completely go off to a new technology such as all ADB, or just avoiding ADB together and staying all SCAM. That can be a big difference on your TCO.
Predictive maintenance is another thing that has become easier with technology, and as time goes on, the vehicles, including the trailers, are getting smarter and smarter, and telematics is reducing downtime and maintenance costs due to these improved predictive maintenance capabilities. Let's talk a little bit about some of the advantages there, perhaps, in your keep, trade, or sell calculus.
Well, that's right. Your onboard diagnostics are much better in predicting and matching up against known repair causes based on diagnostic codes. So again, the ability to forecast when a major overhaul is going to be needed, for example, by keeping up with your preventative maintenance, can avoid that major overhaul and again, keep the vehicle in service, productive service, a lot longer. Again, it all directly impacts your cost per mile calculation. And knowing that number is critical, and monitoring that number. As CPM starts to climb, you'll say, why is that happening? Is it simply because everything's wearing out? Is it because our maintenance can't keep up with the new systems, or is it simply the new systems are better and we don't have to maintain them as much? So knowing that number is very critical.
The other factor too, that cost per mile, if you see it creeping up after a new acquisition, you got to wonder, did I spec the vehicle right for the application I have? Or if you purchased a vehicle in the secondary market, did the vehicle that I purchase come from a location that doesn't match up well with the one I'm in. So those are factors as well. You really got to stay on top of when you're making these decisions. Another KPI I think is improved emissions system maintenance. Right, I think emission systems have gotten better. After treatment has been a tough thing to deal with. Even today, we just did we're in the middle of doing our top 5 maintenance concerns that keep you up at night. And I was looking at some of the preliminary data, and after treatment is back in the news again. So it's something we're still struggling with. But some of the newer systems are much better than the ones from 10 years ago. That's definitely an area where there's been some advances, right?
That's correct. And of course, if you have issues with maintaining EGRs and selective catalytic reduction systems, is the number of regens that are forced can dramatically affect your productivity, as well as the cost of maintenance can just climb through the ceiling because of those unexpected maintenance costs out in the field, the interventions you got to do in the field. We do actually, in the RP itself, we actually have a list of various recommended practices, a table actually of about 20 of them that are critical to monitor. That gives you the keys to the maintenance factors you need to keep watching to maintain your optimum total cost of operation number, but also it gives you benchmarks to measure against when things are starting to get toward the end, indicating you're in an end of life cycle.
Another factor that we have in the recommended practice, this is a very big one, is driver satisfaction. Particularly if you're a fleet, you've got to manage, let's say, 100 or more assets. You've got to make sure you're keeping your drivers happy, because those are the folks that make the money for your operation. What are some of the considerations we have when it comes to driver satisfaction and how it plays into this keep, sell, or trade calculus?
I always like to joke about, when I first started in the business, it was, driving a truck was kind of sitting on a brick while you're driving across a bunch of bricks. It was not comfortable. Now it's like driving your living room or your very well padded executive office around. And the special seat is number one factor that the drivers love. It affects, because you're in that seat so long, it affects your whole train of thought and your productive thought as a driver. That's the number one thing that all drivers list in our surveys as to what means to them the most satisfaction factor. Other things happen, like whether they get a larger sleeper berth, if it's a late model vehicle, of course, whether you have an APU to run everything, your hotel loads while you're sitting on the side after your mandatory break at the end of the day, and all of those other things that attach to that to make your life better and more comfortable are all important to driver satisfaction. So, of course, if you're a happy driver, you're going to be a safe driver and obviously a productive and profitable driver to your company.
One of the things that I don't think a lot of folks think about when it comes to the decision to keep, sell, or trade a vehicle has to do with parts availability. And that's been a real concern ever since COVID hit, particularly when the part shortages were very acute. It's gotten a little better now, but still, you've got to figure you might have a great vehicle, but if the vehicle now is getting old in the tooth and you're having a hard time getting parts, they're not making parts, or you have to rely on second, third, aftermarket kind of suppliers, maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe you want to think about a newer vehicle.
Well, exactly, Robert. And you mentioned the COVID cycle. That was the whole EGR sensor, where the chipsets were not available and the parts were not available at any cost. And that basically meant you were having to sit down. So those are definitely the things you need to be looking at. Is there another vehicle with another design, another engineering underlying design that works better, that is a better duty cycle for your particular fleet that you may want to go to? Those are all factor into that.
The OEMs or the manufacturers will provide replacement parts for late model equipment, but as the equipment gets older, it starts to dry up, and then you start going to sources like Craigslist or eBay or You Have It to try to get parts. It was really acute during COVID, and people were doing that and getting very creative about how they're sourcing the parts. But at some point, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, and you really might have to think about a trade or a new unit to kind of get out of that cycle, because it really can affect downtime.
Well, that's right, exactly. The Again, it affects your ability to get the vehicle back on the road. If you've got to wait around even for a special delivery of that Craigslist part that you just bought, the truck may have to sit down for 2 days. Well, that part gets delivered halfway across the country. That means you're losing all of that bottom line income and increasing your expense line items.
Yeah, and the parts may get scarce, so the price goes up. Something else to think about. What about warranty? Warranty is a big issue for a lot of operations. Of course, a lot of folks say I'd rather have the uptime than the warranty, but still, warranty is important, and that's a really key factor when making this decision to keep, sell, or trade.
Well, that's right. If there's any warranty exists, that's actually a value added on the sales value, because that's something that your secondary user is going to be willing to pay for, whether that's somebody you're selling directly to or somebody that a dealer, for example, would have waiting in the wings when you buy a new unit to replace and trade. Still the same thing is how does that enhance the value to the next buyer? And that in turn is money back in your pocket to reinvest.
You're listening to Tech Talk with TMC. We have Jack Legler here, TMC Technical Director. We're talking about the new recommended practice that the Technology and Maintenance Council has on when to keep, sell, or trade a truck. Jack, some of the other things that really can perplex a vehicle owner or vehicle fleet manager are all the regulatory changes that come down, especially with the emissions and so forth. We kind of spin our heads as to whether, we're getting more stringent or less stringent in this particular political climate. But that's something you really got to keep up on.
Well, that's right. And that can actually increase a market for a secondary sale, either to trade or to sell to somebody else. Because we, on the new equipment side, we saw a very large pre-buy happening in the last couple of years, and we had surveyed that in 2024 as we saw the EPA, U.S. EPA, coming up with greenhouse gas phase 2 emission cycle. We did see a very large pre-buy. Of course, that also enhances the ability or shall we say, the attractiveness of that vehicle you want to sell or trade to that next buyer, because they're not going to have to pre-buy, for example. Plus, the money that you get from that trade or sale, you can buy a new equipment that's compliant, which is obviously going to be more expensive on the front end. But that means you'll have capital to help pay for it.
So as part of this recommended practice, and there's a lot of other factors we're going to get into before the end of the segment, but I would like to bring into the discussion this trade cycle calculator that we've come up with based on the recommended practice that TMC members can use to kind of like work through these different parameters that we've talked about and plug their numbers in, and maybe it can give you an idea of it's a good time to keep, sell, or trade, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And as the way this calculator works, it's a spreadsheet-based model, and essentially your output indicator on that's a very nice graphic that looks like a fuel gauge, basically. And it's a decision meter that goes from keeping it all the way to consider trading it, or somewhere in the middle. Maybe I should think about it. So where on that spectrum do I sit based on all those factors and more that we just discussed?
So if you walk through the calculator, it's a very simple Excel-based looking interface, and it's based on Excel, as a matter of fact. And it gives you some questions right up front that are very easy to answer, I think. Like, for example, one of the questions it asks you is, how important is having the most current level of emissions-compliant vehicle in your fleet?
That's right. And it basically, those are things that you need to do your homework on, essentially. And it really deals with that. How important is vehicle downtime? And it goes back to how maintenance cycles are impacting that KPI, knowing that number. Of course, and particularly into that secondary buyer, if you're going to sell to somebody else, having that truck, how good does it look? Just as your driver's satisfied with the truck looking good, that's going to also affect its value to the next buyer, and their driver's the same thing. Very important factor.
So for the key questions it asks you right up front in terms of your strategies, how important is emissions compliance? How important is vehicle downtime to your operation? How important is your fleet's appearance? And how important is having the most current level of collision mitigation technology in your fleet? And you get either answer it's important, not important, somewhat important. You put that into the calculator, and then there's other factors you have to put in, such as your asset number, your VIN, your in-vehicle service date. Now, remember, this isn't something we're storing in the cloud or anything. This is a downloadable. You plug your own numbers in. It resides on your own laptop or desktop or phone. You do it there. We have nothing to do with the data or anything like that. And then you plug in your mileage, your compliance expiration if it's happened, downtime percentage you currently are experiencing, repair costs. It'll ask you what your repair and maintenance costs are, your remaining warranty on the particular unit, cost of a new vehicle to replace, what's the trade value or sale value of your unit, and then it asks you some questions about your miles per gallon and your overall cost per mile. Plugging all that in, like you say, you have this really neat looking fuel gauge that tells you either green, keep, possible trade, yellow, or red, consider trading. And I think it's a really useful tool. The formulas that all this is based on are well thought out and vetted, and there's a lot of important industry knowledge that went into developing this particular recommended practice. Let's talk about some of the other factors in this as well. I mentioned briefly about collision mitigation. Advanced driver assistance systems, depending on your operation, it doesn't replace a good driver. A driver always has to be the one that makes the final decision with this technology. But it can be a help, and some of these technologies are more applicable than others to a given operation.
And that's right. And also depends on what generation of those systems you're looking at, because if you're looking at a Gen 1 ADAS system, there are a lot more bells and whistles and performance features on a Gen 3, even from the same systems manufacturer. So knowing that and what those systems are is going to make that more attractive to a new driver or a new owner who's more interested in the more modern features, such as adaptive cruise control and automated headlights, blind spot identification systems, all of those other good things. And particularly also if you happen to have a driver monitoring system of some sort, either in-cab or external, those are some of the later generation features that can be very attractive to a new owner, because they're going to be able to get a higher performing vehicle for less than the cost of acquiring new.
Even some of the passive safety systems like supplemental restraint systems, airbags, for lack of a better term, seat belts could be better on the newer vehicle, and the crumple zones that are designed into the truck should there be a crash can do a better job of protecting you in the vehicle and protecting others, right? It has to do with what they call crash worthiness and crumple zones and things like that. That's another factor to consider.
Well, that is, and also if you're a good buyer, for example, that's what you'll research is what has been the accident history on that vehicle. And indeed, you would, as a buyer, be asking questions as to whether and how systems were recalibrated after those collision repairs, and that's going to make a lot of difference on your trade or sell value.
And the area you operate the unit in is so important. A lot of our listeners operate all over the continental United States, maybe into Canada, Mexico, and Alaska. But, if you are more regional and you're in a warmer, drier part of the country, that's where you're doing your operation, you may be able to keep a vehicle longer than, let's say, somebody that runs up in the Northeast in the winter. With exposed to all sorts of corrosive chemicals. That could be a big factor in whether or not you keep, sell, or trade, right?
Well, exactly. Again, because of the impact on those chemicals, especially on electrical systems and sensors, and all those things are attached to all those electrical systems and sensors, that can really just drive your maintenance cost, KPI, your mile per mile cost, way up. And of course, that affects the decision to keep or not. That's very important to understand where that needle is moving on that particular factor. So you can. One of the decisions you want to make is changing the duty cycle on that vehicle to a different geographic area, time of day, that may actually reduce some of that exposure to the harsh conditions that are driving up your costs. And that way you may be able to protect the investment a little bit longer.
Yeah, the decision to keep, sell, or trade is really quite a personal one in a lot of ways, particularly for an owner-operator or a small fleet. And the trade cycles vary so much between, let's say, a large fleet, medium fleet, small fleet, different operations, vocations. You could have an over-the-road trucking company that might have a trade cycle of 5 years or less due to the amount of miles they're accumulating during the course of the year. But another company running local routes, they could have a trade cycle of 5 to 10 years. They run fewer miles. But then again, maybe the local trucking company is accumulating more engine hours due to a higher idling operation. So not only do you have to think about that when you're considering keeping, selling, or trading your own vehicle, but you have to think about that when you're looking at buying somebody else's prior equipment.
Well, that's right. And then you can definitely see there's a very interesting graphic in the RP that tracks used market over time from the Sandhills Equipment Value Index. And that you can clearly see that pre-buy that went on in the pre-greenhouse gas phase two market is the interesting used vehicles went way, way up, which of course enhances your ability to sell or trade at that point.
That's a good point. The used truck market strength is a very important consideration when it comes into this calculus, and it's volatile right now. It could be different than it was 2 or 3 years ago for all sorts of factors. Tariffs are big in a lot of people's minds right now, and that affects the price of everything. Don't see a lot of vehicles being sold right now new because of that. So people are keeping their vehicles longer. That's going to affect the used trade market eventually. When that situation rights itself, all of a sudden a lot of vehicles are going to be coming on the market all at one time, and then the price of used trucks may drop. You may be able to get bargains, but then again, people are keeping the trucks longer, so you're going to be getting older vehicles when those used trucks start freeing up. It's a very complicated calculus there. We've got about 30 seconds, maybe a minute to wrap up. Any final thoughts on the recommended practice?
Oh, it's a great one because it actually makes you think about all of those factors that go into your KPIs and your TCO, total cost of operation. It makes you really, by doing that homework, you're going to improve your overall maintenance efficiency just by asking yourself those questions.
The recommended practice is RP 1620. It's guidelines for keeping, trading, or selling a Class 7 and 8 tractor. It's part of our recommended practices collection. If you join TMC today, you will get the copy of this along with all of the different recommended practices we have to offer in the council. There's about 4,000 pages of information, 500 plus individual recommended practices, and it's a great benefit for anybody who's operating commercial vehicles in this day and age. With that, I think we've covered a lot of ground when it comes to the decision onto keep, trade, or sell. And the calculator alone, I think, is worth the price of admission for folks that are looking to try to, help themselves determine whether or not it's the right time to keep, sell, or trade based on all of the different parameters we've been talking about today. Thank you so much, Jack. We'll look forward to having you on another Tech Talk with TMC really soon. Next week, we're going to be inviting Joe Long, who's going to be talking about coolant and diesel exhaust fluid maintenance on the next edition of Tech Talk with TMC. Back to you, Jimmy Mack, in the studios.
Robert, thank you so much. I feel like we're actually engaged today in a great kind of long value lesson about how to kind of maneuver our way through this strange economy that we're existing in right now, and the information about
it's strange.
Yeah, it's genuinely strange, and I think you guys have introduced a lot of certainty in how to deal with the uncertainty of buy, sell, or trade, and that was really, really informative. Thank you so much, my friend, and it's great to hear what you got cooking up for next week as well too. What's the rest of the week look like for you before I shuffle you off this radio coil?
Well, we're actually working to try to get ready for our National Technician Skills Competition and TMC Fall Meeting. We've got a lot of great sessions, and we've got a lot of great task forces working on new recommended practices that we're just really excited to be bringing to the industry in the next 12 months.
Thank you, my friend. And, of course, as always, if you want to give people a place they can go to check you guys out, please do so now before you head off into the rest of a very vibrant existence.
Love to have you join us. You can come to tmc.trucking.org or tmcfall.trucking.org if you want to learn more about our fall meeting. There you will find everything you want to know about the Technology and Maintenance Council.
Thank you, Robert Braswell, for continuing the longest running segment on Radio Nemo. Man, you're the best.
Thank you much. See you next week.
Yes, sir.